What's up, everybody, and welcome to this very special video. This is one segment that you're about to see. This is one segment from a 30-hour live stream that I did as a marathon event over the course of 2 days back in April. So if you check it out right here, you can see the actual course event, or sorry, not course, the actual course site launch stream 2-day marathon event poster, which is set up to look something like a Coachella or a Warped Tour kind of poster. It was a really big deal, and I'm totally proud of myself for pulling it off. And also, I just feel totally honored that so many amazing people were willing to visit me on my channel and talk about so many interesting topics. But with all of that said, as you can see here, on the first day, I had a launch party. And then after that, Daniel Tutt was the first person in the lineup. And we talked about leisure and Timenergy, which was an amazing conversation that I hope to continue soon. But at some point in that conversation, and that's this one that you're about to watch, Nina Power intervenes. And so I wanted to explain really quick, this was not on purpose. I kind of take her side at some point in the thing, though I was also trying to, facilitate what I took to be a very important conversation. And it's the kind of conversation that cannot take place in academia today, much less on most existing platforms, apparently even Zero Books, where Nina Power and Daniel Tutt had a conversation. It was going to get posted, but then because of protestation, because of self-appointed representatives of a community, I put that in square quotes because there's no such thing as homogenous communities. We're all split subjects, and all communities are also split. And obviously online, it's even worse because they're really just consumer demographics and all of that. But, whatever. There had been, a potential crisis or threat to this community. And so, apparently allowing Nina Power to speak her opinions is dangerous or something. And so this is not a dunk on Daniel Tutt. It's a dunk on Zero Books and the whoever is ultimately behind all of this stuff. And it's not even a dunk. It's just like everyone has their own priorities, and I personally think that allowing these kinds of contradictions to work themselves out so that people can at least understand what's going on, what the situation is important from an educational standpoint. Now, most people are just a part of the left media, alternative media like milieu. They're doing sort of like underground journalism or underground pop propaganda. And what I'm trying to do is sort of the opposite of those things, because I do think that there needs to be a space for education and for understanding the contours and contradictions constitutive of the fields of the life of the mind, and that without a serious time spent tarrying in a space of critical inquiry and discourse with people that we disagree with, we're not going to learn, we're going to develop, and we're not going to be worth shit, honestly. Like no activism or art is going to be worth shit if it doesn't go through that period of critical suspension of presuppositions and of serious inquiry into values and of trying to take on other perspectives. All right. But with that said, I mean, people at other things like Zero Books or whatever, they've got their own goals, and, it's probably valid or whatever. I don't know. I'm as you'll find out in this conversation, I'm pretty out of the loop. I asked Daniel Tutt point blank at one point, like, are you running the show there? But it's not up to him, is what I found out. And so I didn't know any of this stuff going in. I didn't expect Nina and Daniel to have this conversation, but I do support them having a conversation. And that's why I am reposting this. And it's something that you'll see at Theory Underground that you're probably not going to see anywhere else. And what I really hope from both of them is to be able to have them both back on separate from one another for focused conversations on the topic matters that I hold near and dear and in common with them. And then also, hopefully in the future, when I actually get around to another one of these events that I have coming up called Contradictions, it's in the works. I really hope that the two of them will return and actually give one another the time and energy and attention that not just the other deserves, but also that we all deserve as students, as people who are trying to understand what's going on, and as people who care deeply about the state of the discourse. So with all that said, this is basically two presentations. One is a conversation with Daniel and Tutt. The other one is this intervention from Nina, who popped into the Zoom call. She was going to join on the launch party side, and but then her thing ran late, and so she came during Daniel and Tutt's presentation. That's when she intervened. So with all of that said, let's get to it. Theory Underground. I am your host, David McKerracher, and today we are joined by Daniel Tutt. How's it going, Daniel?
It's going great. Thanks so much for having me on. This is exciting.
Yeah, I kind of am really happy that you are the first guest in a 2-day lineup of a lot of really big names and significant fellow travelers and colleagues and collaborators. Because we've never had a conversation before on a stream, much less really like by voice, except for like little snippets of voice chat, like through Messenger.
That's right. Yeah.
You know, you kind of have a presence on the channel already because we played one of your voice messages that you sent us for the young Žižekian defense of Slavoj. And, but the reason I wanted to bring you on for this specifically, it's a conversation we've been thinking about and we've been talking about having for a while, because you were on the K-Voy channel, which became the Vanishing Mediators. That's their new name.
Yep.
With, was it Andrew and Nick, both?
Yep.
That's right.
For sure.
And I think that in that conversation, you ended up both talking about, you all talked about time, energy, and leisure a little bit. And I remember like pulling my hair out over here, like, Andrew, Nick, you guys are reading my book. You gotta defend it. It's not the same thing as leisure. It's related. It's related. It's related, but it's not the exact same thing. The two are complementary. And in the early days, when I first started reading up on when this became an obsession for me, I was thinking of it in terms of leisure, but once it became a technical concept, part of the technical nature of the concept is meant to compensate for how people tend to think about time and energy. And part of the issue is how people think about time and energy in a capitalist world where they've both been commodified in their own ways, but specifically in the form of labor power, right? And so creating, Foucault, you're probably familiar with the pardon, discipline, and punishment on the bells, right? With the discipline of the working class, like it takes something to train a person to become the kind of person who can be at a lot of different places on time and perform a lot of dumb tasks, right? And so I want to get more into time energy, but first I want to talk about leisure as you've approached it through Nietzsche with your upcoming work. The last thing I'll say is you are the author of Psychoanalysis and the Politics of the Family, The Crisis of Initiation, and the upcoming book is How to Read Like a Parasite, What the Left Needs to Know About Nietzsche, which I read a section of, which is on Nietzsche and odium. Can we talk about odium?
Yeah, definitely. Again, really grateful to be on. Long time coming. Yes. So, I think a couple things should be noted about the politics of leisure time, and then we can get to the philosophical questions that underpin the problem of leisure, the problem of time, and its distinction, in your view, with energy, which I think is a super important distinction. I'm a Marxist philosopher, so, I was trained actually by Žižek. I got hooked with Žižek because the first annual Žižek Studies conference, I submitted a paper, went with some of my comrades, and the paper actually won first place. I got to know Slavoj through that experience. Nice. Decided to study with him and really just went full into Žižek mode. And then ended up doing my PhD actually with Alain Badiou at the EGS. And it was a very enriching experience. It was at a moment right before Occupy Wall Street, right as the Arab Spring was happening. So it was a moment where the left was burgeoning into something possibly militant, right? And so that's kind of my origin in the, considering that you're a young Žižekian and how important Slavoj's work is for you. I just wanted to start with that, how important it is for me too. And over time, I have looked at Marxism and philosophy slightly differently. I have begun to kind of break a bit with not necessarily with Žižek's work per se, but I have broken with the wider field of post-Marxism, right? That kind of post-May 68 fusion of continental philosophy with Marxist thought. I have found, after a lot of the defeats of the left that we've experienced in our time, I have felt that theoretically, a lot of that post-Marxist thought has been super problematic. And one of the main ways that it's been super problematic, in my view, is the complete dismissal of the category of the working class as a kind of a category in which we rethink what the proletariat is today, what we think revolutionary agency is today. So that's one amongst many others. So a big philosopher for me is Georg Lukács, and I've been involved. I'm a co-editor of an upcoming journal on a period of Lukács's work, his later period, in a really neglected work called The Destruction of Reason, where what I find there is a kind of philosophical foundation for a critique of postmodern or post-Marxist thinking. Now, I wrote a book on the family, in part to open up a dialogue with the left. I am somebody who believes in dialogue on the left. So I was interested in having a dialogue with family abolition people, with people that might be ultra leftists, people that might actually be of the left, but not of the Marxist left, right? And that was actually a really interesting experience. The book's been out for over a year, done a lot of programs and events with people, and I've learned a lot about that. We could talk about that in the future. But, my Nietzsche work was sparked from reading Lukács, as well as reading a bunch of other kind of lesser known thinkers, because Nietzsche was the sort of muse of the 68 philosophers, and he's the muse of postmodernism philosophically. The foundation of postmodernism is Nietzscheanism, right? So I was thinking to myself, like, actually, and of course, as a backstory, when I was young, Nietzsche was my first, he's the first one that brought me in. You could say it was like my conversionary, before I was even a Marxist, my conversion to the life of the mind was through Nietzsche. So my book is a kind of grand revisitation of what Nietzscheanism is at its core. And what I'm putting forward is an argument that Nietzscheanism is a very sophisticated political philosophy, which has at times latched on to left philosophy, mainly Marxist philosophy, in ways that I claim are very deleterious to the class struggle and deleterious to Marxism. And that we need a complete reappraisal of how we read Nietzsche. So that's a bit of my background. Now let's talk about leisure time, free time, the importance of that. Well, philosophically, going back to the Greeks and even Roman thought, the name that's given is otium, which is an interesting concept. It's usually broadly defined as leisure time, but it's not exactly leisure time. In fact, what otium refers to is a type of active. It's almost a combination of what we call theory and practice. It's not pure detached theory, and nor is it a kind of overly activist form of free time, etc. It's if you like, a kind of perfect balance between the two. And it has a negative dialectical pole, which is called negotium, which is the kind of negation of otium. Now, in society, and Aristotle recognized this, Plato recognizes this, it's almost the backbone of philosophy, which is society actually must be constructed in such a way where you have a class of people this can be a feudal society, this can be a slave society, it can also be a capitalist society in which otium is deprived, right? And therefore, their desires are actually thought qualitatively without the need for otium. They can experience leisure, but that leisure must be put in the service of their primary function in society, which is to be a laborer, right? So if they have leisure, it's only thought within the confines of their wider social function as a laborer, right? And therefore, philosophers will recognize the necessity to maintain a stratification of social rank, social classes. Rank is probably a better term for it than classes. We can talk about that distinction later. Now, this form of otium is important because philosophers have recognized it as providing a certain subjective function, which is the DNA, the backbone of culture. When a society is deprived of a class of people who are granted access to otium, culture diminishes and culture suffers. So a big theme of postmodernism, of sort of the changes to the economy after the Second World War, and even a big theme starting in the sort of modern industrial revolution of modern capitalism from the 1830s to the present, has been basically a crisis over free time, which is also a crisis over the division of labor, crisis over the division between mental and manual labor, and a crisis over the status of the intellectual worker, right? So modern philosophy can be thought of in this milieu of a profound crisis over otium, and therefore a profound crisis over culture. I mean, you mentioned Foucault earlier, but Foucault's definition of the disciplinary society is actually the control of work time, right? In a sense, Foucault, as a Nietzschean, recognizes that the disciplinary society it abolishes this clear capacity for a class of otium seekers in some sense, right?
Right.
And so it becomes a crisis over the democratization, in some sense, of who has access to otium and who doesn't, right? And this is why Nietzsche can be thought of, and here I'll get to Nietzsche now, if it's okay with you, as a philosopher who understands
Well,
and sees.
before we get into, sorry, like this is a perfect point for me to ask because I'm kind of confused. So you're saying that is it that there's a concern that odium being made available to the masses undermines the ability to have culture because it undermines the ability for a leisure class to exist, like an aristocratic class to kind of go enjoy symphonies and read like the Iliad or something like that?
That's right.
Okay,
That's
just
exactly
making
right.
sure.
Otium has an outcome, which is an active form of applied leisure time that produces. What does it produce? Nietzsche says it produces distinction. Therefore, it produces difference. Nietzsche is a great philosopher of difference.
Right.
He's an aristocratic philosopher, but his aristocratism is not a nostalgic aristocratism. It's aristocratism of the future. It's an aristocratism that's trying to sort of make an account of the changing democratic revolutions from below, in the form of the suffrage movement, in the form of socialism, in the form of the demand for more rights, in the continuation of Jacobinism that was open in the French Revolution. Nietzsche saw all of those plebeian movements.
Right.
Nietzsche called the French Revolution the modern slave revolt, right? Those unruly demands for the masses threaten, for him, the delicate balance that otium produces in society, which is a balance of distinction.
Right.
A balance of distinction, right? That's the aristocratism. That's the obsession that Nietzsche has with the maintenance of a rank order. Now, the irony, and this is the careful irony of Nietzscheanism, especially on the left, is that left-wing philosophers will basically argue that he's right about this necessity of rank in some sense.
Right.
And that to me opens up a sort of under-acknowledged dialogue that we need to have with Nietzsche and the left, is this question not of hierarchy, not necessarily of hierarchy, but of this kind of necessity that culture be generated on the backs of a class, of a working class, who must qualitatively have a different habitus, have a different worldview in which they are trained to not desire otium. This drives us to the revolutionary power of the working class possessing a desire for, in your language, time energy, in my language, otium. Nietzsche saw that as a grave threat if the working class developed such a desire, which is why Nietzsche's politics were meant to destroy proletarian intellectuals, working class intellectuals. Working class intellectuals, in a sense, can be defined as thinkers who are seeking to further the desire that they have, in an outlaw sense, cultivated for the secrets of otium, which structurally should have been opposed, should have been prohibited to them. In Nietzsche's view, if culture is concocted in a successful way, the working class will not desire otium. Right. Because you see, the problem was, in modern industrial capitalism, you have surplus labor, what Nietzsche called extra work, which has to be done, which is degrading work, right? And this means that you need to think carefully about how to satiate the class of people who are going to do that extra work. How is that going to be done? This actually is the backbone of a number of sort of perennially relevant questions, right? And I think that what it shows is that the expansion of a desire for otium amongst the working class represents a profound revolutionary threat to the delicate balance of the class system. That's my contention. And I will say it's refreshing that one of the most popular books on socialism in our time is called This Life by Martin Hageland. I don't know if you've read it.
I love that book, yes.
You're aware of it?
I read like the first couple chapters in the introduction. I listened to it while I was at Amazon last year, and it was enough for me to realize I'm going to start over from the beginning. I need to bring him on my channel. I have to tie him into my future work, because it's basically the theology of time energy, right?
That's an interesting way to say it. He takes a more Kierkegaardian approach and suggests, Kierkegaard had, if we take a step back, when we talk about the theology of time energy, one of the sort of wayward dangers that the church fathers recognized in the history of Christianity is idleness. There's a sin on idleness because it leads to sloth, right? In other words, there's a profound danger that comes with idle free time. Idle free time becomes a question for Kierkegaard, acedia, this kind of spiritual sin. What does that mean, though? In a sense, what it means is that it is a sin to inhabit a directionless form of leisure. And you can think here of the figure even of the bohemian, not necessarily the working class intellectual. I would make a strong distinction there, because the working class intellectual is doing something different. Working class intellectual is dialectically opposing, with a clear conception of power, otium as a class imposition of power.
Right.
The bohemian intellectual, rather, is trying to find something spiritually liberating in the idleness of the use of their free time without a necessary end of a contestation over the class powers question. You see that distinction?
That's a
I
great
think that's very
distinction.
significant.
That's fantastic.
You see my point?
Yes.
And someone like Kierkegaard, who has very little class analysis in his philosophy, which I think is a problem of Kierkegaard,
For sure.
is not going to be useful for our shared interest, Dave, which I think is going back to this question of a working class emancipation, right? And you talk a lot in your writing about how normies, sometimes one way to understand normies is like, you say like they don't get it, right? They don't get that philosophy and speculative thought can be a way of life, right? That it can be something that's transformative, not merely in a spiritual sense, but something more than that. And so I thought like a big provocation of your work in Timenergy is sort of let's put it like this, the underlying question is sort of the question of desire. How do we replicate the desire for the inculcation of a love of speculative thought, of thinking, of theory in this more transformative way, especially amongst the working class? I don't know if that's a fair way to summarize it, but you can respond.
For sure, with one caveat. You basically nailed it. The one caveat is that I'm 100% on board with the basic spirit of Nagel's Kill All Normies, which is really laid out in the last few pages that nobody ever seems to get to, which is just that the whole point that quilts the entire book is that the politics has tended to prioritize transgression and the margins, and we need to actually prioritize regular working class normie people who don't get it. And she was speaking to the left at the time, as she gave up on that, I think. And I think, I don't blame her one bit for having given up on it for a lot of reasons. But for me, it's not that, normies need to get radicalized by the idea of Timenergy so that they all want to read great books. I think that they need to know that that's going on and have access to it, right? I'm going to read a passage from the Grundrisse here in a second. It's my favorite passage. But the point is that they could if they wanted to, right? And so but the main thing is like, people want Timenergy to play the violin. People want Timenergy to run a sustainable garden. People want Timenergy to be parents. There's a lot of reasons to want Timenergy. And my thing is that working class intellectuals need to keep in mind, not everyone in our lives or our workplaces gives a shit about philosophy, and they might never. And in the future, hopefully more people will, but it'll probably never be like mainstreamed in that sense, right? But the passage I want to read from the Grundrisse here is a parenthetical from when he's citing somebody else, actually. And it's just something that he takes for granted, that he never really expounds on in his mature work, but that he does basically get to the heart of in his Estranged Labor piece. He says, over the somewhat longer term, specifically during the upward phase of the economic cycle, however, both wages and profits may show an absolute increase at the same time. And during such periods, the worker may either take the risk of accumulating a small fund of savings for the next crisis, or may broaden the sphere of his consumption to take a small part in higher, even cultural satisfactions. For instance, agitation for his own interests, newspaper subscriptions, attending lectures, educating his children, developing his tastes, etc., constituting the worker's only share of civilization which distinguishes him from the slave. Right? So during capitalism's boom moments, you can either save it up and try to become petty bourgeois, small business owner, or you can spend it on actually attending lectures, which are somewhat expensive if you're not a senior citizen in most cities. Mm-hmm. Right?
And this is a big question in Marx, which you see in a famous passage that Marx once wrote, where in one of the rare speculations that Marx makes about what a communist society might entail, you'll remember he says it would entail the kind of flexible moving in and out of non-fixed positions, right? So you can choose sort of a sense of like fishing in the morning, being a critic in the afternoon,
Right.
maybe doing some labor after that, etc. So it's like this kind of more fluid conception of, against the Nietzschean point around the insistence of a more stratified sense of rank order, right? That to me is an underthought domain of Marxism. I mean, in a sense, it's a blessing that Marx keeps open the question of communism and the future as what I would consider almost like a kind of provocation to revolution as freedom, but without a blueprint for the future society beyond that, added to which, of course, Marx remains a steadfast critic of utopianism at the same time, which is, I think, means that Marxism is distinguished through not so much its codified bureaucratic plan for what a communist society will be, but rather through the dialectical understanding of what Marx calls dictatorship of proletarians, right?
Right.
That's the end that Marx is seeking to arrive at, which is what? Which is basically the achievements of bourgeois democracy. Like Lenin said, proletarian democracy will be 1,000 times more democratic than bourgeois democracy, right? So it's not some anarchist pure abolition of kind of a pure dynamite to the state. It's rather a more careful sublation of the unmet demands that exist amongst the working class, which bourgeois democracy has always refused, constitutively refused to implement. In that way, I don't think we really have to think, and this kind of goes back to my formation. My formation was actually in this post-Marxist, ultra-leftist formation, which was very much a fusion of kind of anarchist ideals and Marxist ideals. And so I think for a while I did really think that Marxism was a kind of post-apocalyptic, out of pure destruction kind of thing. Whereas now, and from that, by the way, of course, there's a huge allergy to things like electoralism, and I was a huge follower of Alain Badiou, and in Alain Badiou's philosophy, he puts forward a systematic critique of all forms of representation, right? So if you're a Badiouian, you really have a hard time even thinking about contesting power within institutions. It's a very anti-institutional philosophy, actually. I've kind of moved away from that. You know what I'm saying? I'm super much on board with the building of a socialist workers' party. This is my main, but I don't want to get too far afield from our topic, but that's what you reminded me of when you read that passage. You know what I'm saying? Which is Marx thought communist society as allowing for a freer movement around this question of otium. Now, I think the conservative response to Marxism would say that if you don't have a society in which, because what does otium produce? It produces distinction. It produces difference. It produces rank. Therefore, it produces a kind of homeostasis in the social order. Without it, you have no culture, and you have a basically chaotic culture in some sense. So the question, I think, would be, maybe we could say even in our present world, where we have this ultra-liberalist hysteria amongst the managerial class, right? And of course, we see this even in the movie Tar, right? Which is a movie about the loss of otium, or rather, it's a movie about the crisis of otium. Tar? If you've seen that film, right? Because she represents somebody from a period of time in which the distinctions of high culture had a certain efficacy, for which they no longer do. Right. So we are witnessing the breakdown in the efficacy of distinctions based on otium, which I think as Marxists, it would behoove us to actually recognize that in that disintegration, despite all of its ultra-liberal chaos and so on, there's still something possibly emancipatory about that, because those distinctions do need to be brought down. Because why? Because they rely on this Nietzschean point I mentioned earlier, which is this underclass must adjust itself, in a sense, to not desiring otium. You know what I'm saying? And I wonder what you all think about that.
So
to me, we are in a crisis of it.
I strongly disagree.
Welcome, Nina. One moment, everybody. I want to make a quick little announcement about a quick change of plans. Basically, the plan was to have a conversation about odium and Timenergy for 45 minutes, and then we're going to go to Q&A. But Nina Power has been trying to figure out where she could fit into this thing for the last couple of days, and then she found she was originally going to be here for kind of the tail end of the launch portion, but she kind of was only able to join now because she was involved with a podcast. And the conversation I'm hoping that we can have here in the next 20 minutes is one that I actually have in my dreams. So the fact that it's actually happening is really exciting because you both are thinkers about the family. I want to wrap this up by wrap up the previous portion by just saying that, your reference to Lenin and the fact that Lenin relied on like a very strict sense of Taylorism, and that was necessary for war communism. But I think that the odium piece for the masses gets lost in the sauce, perhaps. That I would like to bookmark as hopefully something that we can talk about, Daniel, in the future, because I'd like to bring you back where we can go more in depth. Also, Timenergy, it's not been defined, it's not been expanded on. The quick version of it is that it is large, repeatable blocks of energy-infused time. I never put it so succinctly in Waypoint, but that's how it's come about, because the whole point of Timenergy is that it's what happens before that's fragmented into where all you have is energy without time to repeat things, or time without energy in the evenings or weekends because you're exhausted from work, which tears apart families, which tears apart communities. And the segue here is to say that you're both thinkers of the family. Nina Power is one of the editors at Compact, but is also the author of a couple of books, One Dimensional Woman and What Do Men Want? But more importantly, and what people are not aware of usually, I think, is that she was the editor for a work that's currently on the screen if you're watching on the live chat side, called Why Work? Arguments for the Leisure Society. And basically what you did was you pulled together a lot of essays on the topic, and then you wrote like the preface, right? I'm wondering if you would like to say a little bit about your background, what you've been up to, kind of just introduce yourself, and if you disagree with Daniel, how do you disagree with him, and do you disagree with your original contribution to this work, or has that been found fundamental for how you've developed?
Mm-hmm. No, sure. Sorry for that rather abrupt interruption there, and I don't want to take away from Daniel's time because obviously this was his slot. So please, if this was inappropriate, then Daniel, please carry on. But I think we, I was listening to Daniel, so I didn't just jump in. I was actually listening to most of Daniel's talk as well. And we have actually spoken in the past, but Daniel will not release the video for reasons of his own.
Well, he already said it. He already said it. He's trying to court an audience of people who are on the left primarily, and that involves he's in dialogue with these family abolitionist types that you and I don't think even want to communicate with at all. So he's sort of a bridge here.
No, I mean, like, honestly, my position is a sort of strategic plural liberalism, which is I'll speak to anybody, right? Like, and I think that's the nature of dialogue, and that's the nature of philosophy. And I found that leaving the academy was actually a better way of doing that. And I think one of the, just to say about the kind of format of the thing that you're setting up, what we're seeing is this kind of breaking out into these kind of para-academic, post-academic worlds, which relate very much to what Daniel was saying about otium and about access to culture and information and dialogues and discussions. I mean, if you, like, I'm obviously a huge fan of Ivan Illich, and when he talks very early on about how we get people to speak in networks or to find each other in order to learn skills and to, these forms of communication. I mean, you now literally can find the 8 people in the world who want to talk about Ivan Illich's 1982 book on gender, right? Like, there's something kind of incredible about this possibility. And it's nothing to do with money. It's nothing to do with, of course, there's a question of time. Of course, there's a question of energy. But, there is a process of negotiation where you can have all of these sort of things. And maybe someone in Mexico can't pay or can pay $10, but someone else who's like a, I don't know, startup person can pay you $1,500, right? So you can have all these sliding scale thing, and nothing goes to an institution, right? And of course there are like downsides to these things. We can talk about certification and like, obviously, but that whole institutional thing has collapsed as well, I think, and I think we're kind of living through the collapse of higher education on a mass scale. So what you have is a kind of release of otium to some, to use this word, and I agree it's a very powerful word, and I think this is whether we're talking about free time or free exploration of polyvalence, which is Marx's description of communism in the German ideology, precisely. The fact that all of our polyvalent capacities, we're not even individuals under capitalism, right? Like, because we're not social, we're not yet social individuals. We're kind of completely limited and restricted. So I think there is a kind of opportunity to rethink both otium and aristocracy, right? I would say, for example, that everyone is an aristocrat. I think it's less about defending a kind of collective working class culture, which also was itself pedagogical. I mean, the amount of autodidacticism among people who were working for fucking 18 hours a day is insane, right? But it's, so there's that whole, and Ron Sierra has basically dedicated his life to talking about this. E.P. Thompson talks about this too. There's great historical work on this. But I think, in a kind of post-academic or para-academic world, there is this actually a possibility, and so many people I've met have been self-educated, self-taught, perhaps through, Tar is also about this, she watches the Leonard Bernstein video, she's working class, right? That's her access to high culture. And I agree it's about distinction and differentiation, but I would say that the mainstream culture, the culture we currently live in, is completely homogenizing. It is all about the elimination of difference, whether we're talking about sexual difference, whether we're talking about difference in, I don't know, age, or positive difference in terms of like where we come from. We have a global homogenizing culture, which is absolutely radically opposed to difference, in fact. And that's the kind of maybe point of disagreement. Maybe it's a terminological question with Daniel, but
thank you, Nina. Now, I know that you're going to be able to hang out a little bit longer than Daniel because he's got to go off on a family vacation. So speaking of the family, I do want you both to talk about family, odium, and your politics, both of you. But I just want to say, like, this wasn't planned, and I do want Daniel to be able to kind of say his piece before he's out of here. Yeah,
sure, no.
But in your otium, in the piece I read, the excerpt from your upcoming book here, Daniel, you mentioned Sloterdijk as one of the Nietzscheans, contemporary Nietzscheans, who is for this verticality and distinction. And I would say that his defense of verticality in You Must Change Your Life is actually very formative for me. And as a working class person, I would say I am against working class emancipation unless we can maintain distinction and verticality, because what I want is to have a good social democrat sort of base camp, but everyone should have after 20 hours a week the rest of their free time to be able to climb whatever mountains they want. And if you want to be the number one player of World Warcraft or Tetris or the sustainable garden person, or if you want to be the best theorist in the world, become the best, but you have the resources to become best, right? Like, so do you agree or disagree?
That. No, I like that. I think a couple things. We can address the past that Nina and I share. We can address that in a moment, but let's stick to this rich theoretical conversation that we're having, which I think is very valuable. I agree that the crisis of contemporary middle class power and ideology within institutional life is eroding these distinctions of difference which come from a prior form. The question there always, though, I mean, we see this with Philip Rieff in his book on Freud and his book on the therapeutic, right? Is when did this really instantiate itself in our culture, right? Was it this kind of general consumer era post-war stuck feature with the rise of the middle strata, the rise of the new class, which they used to be called, today we call them the PMC? Are they the kind of bone of contention that has disrupted this old order? So there's that question about the periodization. There's the other question from a working class socialist point of view that I wonder is, are we nostalgic for resurrecting something that was? I think there's a reactionary danger. We can define what that might be, to any politics of nostalgia, in part because capitalism always prevents a politics of nostalgia from ever working. So it becomes, therefore, a politics of frustration and of impossibility.
What did you say? Marxism is a politics.
So
Marxism.
That, and I think Nina and I have actually talked about that before
Marxism is a
in
politics.
Our prior conversation.
What did you say? What did you say? What did you say that? Sorry. Am I coming through? Sorry, I was muted for a second, but I just wanted to interject and say, Marxism is a politics of nostalgia. It misses a time when there wasn't working. It misses a time when there were working class institutions that came about on their own without activists coming from colleges to say you need to organize.
I don't agree. I think that
are there working Are there working class libraries? Are there working class libraries today? Are there working class libraries?
I think that
kitchens,
from the standpoint
houses
of the left in some iterations, as we know it today, they paint Marxism, a Marxism that cares about the centrality of working class, what I call worldview building Marxism,
right?
Which, of course, all of the post-70s people that Nina used to study with, Badiou and Laclau and all of the post-Marxists, they are anti-working class Marxists. They are. That's a fact. We are in a very unique generational moment after 2008, based on a collective experience that we've witnessed with the crisis of capitalism, to reject the abandonment of working class centrality in Marxist study. That's what I was saying at the beginning. I don't know if Nina Power agrees with me on that. So that's something that we may have a solidarity with. Let me say something, though, now that...
For sure.
Nina, I did interview Nina about her affiliation with Compact. And to put my cards on the table, Dave and Nina, I am concerned about Compact. Why? It is a magazine that partners with strong conservative elements. And we're in a moment of such ideological incoherence that I just worry, and this is a huge conversation, we don't need to get into it. That was one thing that I wanted to interview Nina about. Now, because of Nina's experience with the trans community, which hasn't gone well, if we're honest, they asked me not to publish the interview. So I listened to them and I honored their preference. We can talk about that.
Which trans?
That was the background, Dave.
Which trans community?
Okay,
which trans community?
Look, I don't believe in no platform and I don't believe in gatekeeping. At the same time, I made a decision because I was of the mind that my book on the family, well, I made a strategic partnership decision there, right? And it's not that I necessarily regret it. It's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that, like, perhaps there's another time in which Nina and I can have a future conversation in which this can be revealed publicly. Because, again, I'm less interested in Nina's relationship to the trans issues. I think that's somebody else can have that conversation. But I'm more interested in the possible pitfalls of the Compact magazine moment, which I see a lot of contradictions. And it does worry me a bit. That's all I wanted to say about that. But please respond.
So, yeah, but my position here for the last couple of years has been one of most of my remaining friends still being leftists, but that them being my friends knowing that I am in no way, shape, or form interested in courting an audience that is overly concerned with the image of communities inculcated by institutions within government and in the nonprofit sector that pose themselves as representatives of marginalized groups through identity politics. And really what the more important thing there, which I was talking about earlier on stream, is discursive Taylorism, making areas of discourse monopolized and only specific specialists are going to be able to speak about those issues, which is a genocide of voice, is a genocide of thinking, is a genocide of any kind of actual robust, diverse politics. And so all I would say is that I see some stuff from Compact where I'm like, what the hell? But I also see shit like that from Jacobin. And I know for some people, they're like, that sort of Fichtean dialectics of synthesis between opposing. Oh, no. I prefer to see something productive come from contradiction, but it's not going to be synthesized. It's going to be irreducible in some cases. So anyway, I appreciate that you're both willing to have a conversation in the future.
Philosophy is to remain within the left, to maintain my principles. I may not succeed. I mean, we're in a very ideologically incoherent world. We're all experimenting to some extent, if we're honest, right?
Right.
However, I'm also guided by some principles of solidarity, and I have to make decisions at certain points. I respect a lot of what Nina has done. I don't know enough about the trans dynamics to make a judgment on that. So this is just the background, Dave, about what that happened. And it's okay that Nina's here right now. I'm not worried or anything like that. I'm excited to see what she has to say about this, because I do think the crisis of our present needs to be historicized. And from a Marxist point of view, I don't know how much Nina is committed to Marxism anymore. I know that she was. And I would actually like to hear, how that, because Nina, the tradition you were affiliated with was at times ultra anti-workerist Marxism, right? It's ultra leftism in a way, right? You were affiliated with all of the far left currents.
I mean, ultra leftist pretty much just means
to you now.
Aren't ultra leftists just the people who have real principles and get killed by people like Stalin
No. Ultra leftism can be defined as a refusal of any concept of mediation with institutions, with representative blocks. Okay. They tend to be anti-electoral. They tend to be opposed to unionism. And Lenin said one of their downsides is that they conceive of Marxism in a kind of paradoxically idealist way, because they're so opposed to mediations, in a sense. So they tend to be insurrectionary. They tend to see the proletariat as a kind of lumpen proletariat force. They tend to, and a big thing is they intend to, especially after the Second World War, marginalize any possible revolutionary agency amongst the traditional working class. And that's one thing that I personally have become weary of. I don't trust Marxists like that anymore.
Good.
I don't know about Nina Power, but I don't. I'm kind of beyond that now.
Your interest in the destruction of reason and Lukács and all this is also something I like to have future conversations with, because I don't like a lot of what Lukács is doing there. I think it's such but I don't want to say why, because that opens a can of worms. I just like that to be a promise to more conversation. As Emmanuel Levinas says, the saying will always overflow the said. So I hope that this is an opening, a gateway to future stuff. But
let's do it.
I know you were kind of setting you were setting up a door to turn this back over to Nina, and I hate to yank it away from you, Nina, but for 1 second, your cards have been put into question, your position, what you're doing. But I want, Daniel, I want you to be able to say something about yourself at the subject of enunciation here, right? What is not just, you're on the left and you're committed to some principles on the left and you're a Marxist. I'm more interested institutionally. There are people that you are affiliated with that make it so that, if you want to hold the responsibilities that you currently have within the institutions that you have, then you kind of have to play your cards delicately and carefully and strategically. And I think we can all be somewhat sympathetic to people who aren't trying to burn bridges and go homeless in the next year. Okay, but how much of that is on the academic side and how much of that is on the Zero Books side? And what is your responsibilities at Zero Books? For instance, when someone like Christine Louis-Dussoli does not get republished after the change and her video has been buried and hidden, whose responsibility is that? Is there a committee? Is there a board that you serve? Are these things that you just haven't gotten around to and you're basically steering the ship?
No, I can answer that question. No. Yeah. The interview that I did with Nina Power was about Compact Magazine. Nothing to do with Zero Books at all. I actually have a friendly relationship with Zero. They've merged with Repeater Books. My Nietzsche book is going to be with Repeater Books. I respect Tariq Godard, their founder, close friend of Mark Fisher's. He's a very intelligent person. He really knows what he's doing, and I believe in him. I avoid drama as much as I can because I think that what I'm trying to do is promote public thinking, and so I can't get weighed down with any of that. I have no formal relationship to Zero Books other than they allow me to post some of my interviews and discussions on their channel. That's it.
I did not know that.
Nothing other than that. Nothing other than that. I'm completely independent.
I
have recently joined Class Unity, by the way. I don't know if you've heard of them. Which I'm very interested in. I've just started out, but it's a new socialist effort which is actively breaking from DSA.
It's a faction of the DSA.
At a point we have to say the DSA question of reform, and I love my friends at Marxist Unity Group, MUG. Bless their hearts. I don't think they're going to succeed, though, based on my assessment. So I do feel that the DSA is a middle-class captured thing, and we need to find a way towards the creation of a socialist party. We can talk about that later.
For sure.
But no, nothing like that, my friend. The reason I didn't publish an interview was just because comrades in the trans community, and Nina knows that wherever she goes, unfortunately, there's this swarm of people that follow her in that regard. And so for the reason of honoring their connection and also not wanting to get into something for which I don't have the knowledge to really respond adequately, mainly to the trans debate, I decided to hold the interview. I'm sorry if that hurts your feelings, Nina. I don't intend for it to. Hopefully you can see the kind of complexity of what I'm dealing with. Again, my main interest was just to understand and probe into what Compact Magazine is about at this moment, not from a hysterical standpoint. Like, I'm writing a book on Nietzsche. I think I just wrote an article on Philip Reef. I think conservative thought, reactionary thought, right? It needs to be worked with. Would never be of the position to say, but anyways, there's other concerns with Compact, which we could possibly get into here with our limited remaining time. I hope that answers your question, Dave.
I would like to instead bring it back to Timenergy and Odium, and if Nina wants to say something, go ahead and say something.
Sure.
But I would prefer, if you both are open to it, I could be the mediator between a conversation in the future where we actually talk about Compact, and because I want to defend nostalgia in a lot of ways, but I'm open to a dialogue there, and I'm interested in seeing what you would both say if you had more time. But for right now, let's just bring it back around to the family.
Let's do it.
Timenergy, Odium, Nina, welcome
Sure.
back.
Yeah, we can talk about the family too.
Okay, yeah, sure. I mean, just really quickly, though, to respond to a couple of things that Daniel said. I mean, our conversation was about much more than Compact Magazine. If you recall, we spoke about theoretical matters. It was quite actually a long conversation, and I thought actually quite a good one, to be honest. And so I don't think, I don't know, I think it's a kind of mischaracterization of what we talked about. And and I think the way you're framing the discussion of sex and gender as if it's primarily about transgenderism is also inaccurate. And this is part of the politics of the whole discussion. I mean, in reality, what happened is we had a conversation, you recorded it, and then you blocked a video, or you decided not to put up a video of you speaking to a woman. I mean, this is actually reality, right? For political reasons, you decided it was better to appease a group of people who maybe their tactics you don't approve of, but you're worried about their response. You're worried also about being denounced by association, because this is one of the major tactics of the day, which is guilt by association, because some people are not allowed to be spoken to, and I guess that's something I oppose. And so, very quickly on Compact, I think we are deliberately heterodox. And we also platform people who've been deplatformed or unplatformed or ostracized or unfriended or whatever, because they've spoken out of turn on some issue. And those issues are getting increasingly smaller. And when you talk about the left, I'm economically left. I'm interested in redistribution. I'm interested in, a critique of political economy. The reason I actually got cancelled in 2018 is because I was a member of the Labour Party, right? If you want to talk about representative politics, I was not an ultra leftist in practice. The fact that I was writing about anti-work ideas, also from the second wave feminist movement. I mean, I was, this is also my commitment is to various autonomous feminist positions, right? That's where my anti-work position comes from, actually. And we're all thinking about automation. We're all thinking about modernity. We're all thinking about time and, energy, to use your language. And, so I agree with this point about honesty. Like, I think we are all in a complicated intellectual and theoretical and political and practical position. And that's probably always the case, right? And there's always going to be these friend-enemy distinctions in every political movement. The moment anyone opens their mouth and tries to make a claim about politics, they're on one side or the other. And I'm interested in a way of talking to people that goes beyond these now, I think, historically anomalous separations between left and right. I think there are many aspects of the left historically which are to do with, let's say, socially conservative desire to preserve things like the family against the incursions of modernity. And I think the real conversation is perhaps about how we conceive of modernity. Actually, I think this is one of the major aspects, and this goes back to the point about nostalgia. Not everything in the past, not everything our ancestors thought was wrong because it was in the past and they didn't have iPhones. You know what I mean? Like there's a fucking stupid modernism on the contemporary left, which bears no relation to historical left thought at all, including Marx, for that matter. And I think, the idea that we have to accept as a package a whole host of things, most of which or a lot of which just simply isn't true, and also mitigates against the civil rights and the actually gains that women, for example, have achieved through history in a genuinely progressive sense, right? And we're supposed to kind of give up on those in the name of some kind of really quite artificial program, which is deeply capitalist, deeply individualistic, and deeply consumerist, right? I'm opposed to that, right? I regard myself as a leftist. I still do, but an economic leftist, right? And in the sense that I think we need more materialist, analytic critique of political economy. We need to understand how labor is being distributed. We need to understand how time is distributed, where profits are going, and so on, right? And it's a method, it's a methodology. It's not an affiliation that is based on a friend-enemy distinction, which after all is Schmidt's idea, and I'm not a Schmittian either. And right. I think everybody has their reasons for their positions, and we have to listen to people who have according to the increasingly narrow and hysterical and fanatical left, people who apparently have reprehensible views that they must lose their jobs and lose their friends for holding. I'm completely against this form of ostracism.
Can I just interject that that's also my concern with the liberal left progressive PMC getting radicalized into something kind of Marxist in this day and age? The terror for me is, what if they actually succeeded at gaining a monopoly on the state and economy? See, my first for me, for many years, for probably 6 years of my Bernie activism and my time as a student radical and all of this, the goal was that would be the case. But as I saw people being deplatformed, as I saw the violence, as I saw the discursive Taylorism and the genocide of voice, right, which are like, I'm writing about this right now, it's seeing that made me realize, if the left PMC gains a monopoly on the economy, which means over all of our time and energy and how we comport ourselves in the world, which means where we work, when we work, for how long we work, if that happens, and it has this self-righteous Taylorist approach to discourse where, no, you don't deserve to have a roof over your head. You don't deserve to have a good job. You don't deserve. That's the biggest fear for me. So, and I think people say, we can't have fear motivating our politics. Fear motivates everybody's politics, whatever. For me, my anti-politics comes from my fundamental distrust of the people you're trying to appease here, Daniel.
Let's talk about it. So I don't think that the cohort of people who are for family abolition have any capacity to seize the reins of the state, or they provide, I think, a different ideological function in an era in which institutions like the Democratic Party actually thrive off of chaos thrive off of the chaos of civil society, thrive off of the false perception of like racial civil war in America, for example, which is absolutely fictional. It's a fictional notion. It's a kind of displacement of antagonisms. This is a big theme that that comes up in my Nietzsche book, which is this kind of nominalizing tendency of progressive liberalism is meant to cover over antagonisms that are born from the class struggle. So when I say I'm interested in Lukács and a more rationalist orientation, that I feel is something that's needed right now at a moment in which the possibility for the family is now a bourgeois luxury. The possibility of the family is a middle-class luxury. Even members of the middle class are struggling to achieve it. What that's actually producing is not family abolition in some idealist realm of social policy. That will never happen. What it's actually producing is the opposite of that. It's producing a greater desire that is blocked and prevented amongst the working class. And this is shown in a lot of surveys. So I actually want to be clear that I was trying to start a dialogue with family abolitionists in part to clarify their positions, both to themselves and to the public. Because when I think about what family abolition is, I think it only makes sense when we couch it within a clear class conception, going back to, and Marx was not pro-family abolition in some abstract universal sense by any means. He wrote that gesture at the moment of a revolutionary upsurge of the Communist Manifesto. There are other times in Marx's life where he's talking about how if the proletariat working class doesn't have the strength to desire otium, he wouldn't use that term, but I think we can, then it's not going to be able to fight. If the proletariat desires the family and is not able to produce it, that's going to create a strain of a turn to the right amongst, you see my point? So I'm in the middle of this quagmire, trying to negotiate things on those bases. I'm not trying to seek some sort of cheap artificial solidarity with a small portion of the left like that. No, I was trying to sort of spark a dialogue with them. I think that actually all of these terms need to be like historically concretized in our present. So I don't want to be mischaracterized. I don't want my position to be mischaracterized as anti-family or something like that. I do think that, yeah, go ahead.
I actually thought you were more on the side of the anti-family until I did read your introduction. No, I read your introduction and then I realized, okay, no, he's not just anti. Then I thought, well, he's trying too hard to talk to these people. But I just want to say that goes
back to a dialogue on conversion. I mean, one of the big things that I've realized, and this comes up in my Nietzsche book as well, is that, Sloterdijk's "You Must Change Your Life."
Yeah.
And I know Nina has written a nice review of Sloterdijk. He's a good thinker to work with. We live in a world of a kind of cheap conversions. Very few people actually have profound political conversions. That's actually what I want to reintroduce, because I think that class consciousness, if you actually study the ethnographies and the anthropological research and the sociological research on the working class, there's hardly any working class consciousness that's militant or radical today. We therefore need not some liberal hyperactivism amongst the working class to steer them back into the NGO thing. I think actually we need like thoughtful interventions to help people see class power for what it is. Because I think America, especially America, even beyond, has perfected this kind of muting of working class experience. And we're at a moment of a very early stage where that's starting to crumble, right? So the fact that the family is blocked to the working class is actually going to militate the working class. Could go different ways. Could go towards DeSantis and Trump. We need to create a better alternative to that. You see my point? So I don't know. I don't want to be mischaracterized here, guys. I just really, I'm not saying that
I don't think
the dialogue with family abolitionists was successful. I'm not saying it was successful. It's ongoing. I'm not willing to close it down. I'm willing to have a dialogue with Nina Power. We're having it right now. It's all good.
You don't have to use my surname. I mean, it's fine.
I like saying your full name. Sorry, Nina. Sorry.
It's okay.
I'll say Nina. My bad.
It's Nina Power versus Labor Power. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, actually, it just means poor in Irish. It's hilarious. It's a very silly name. It means my ancestors were too shit to even get jobs. But anyway, on the can I just say something about the family point and work and these questions? They are very, very interesting, right? And the family abolition thing, obviously, in many ways comes out of thinkers like Shulamith Firestone, who was a kind of renegade in the second wave, you know, and this kind of idea. And I wrote about her years ago, but it's part of this kind of like a technophilic solution, let's say, to the natural asymmetry of the sexes, right? Like, you know, we can remove this burden and this suffering and this work, you know, which obviously is in some of the autonomous feminists and is taken up by people like Sophie Lewis and the family abolitionists, and as if to say that pregnancy and all of those things are a form of labor, and we can understand it in this way, right? And that it's a kind of can be understood not only economically in terms of like wages for housework and all those sorts of things, but as a kind of as a form of work that women perform, and that we can use things like IVF and surrogacy, even though I'm radically opposed to surrogacy for various reasons. And I think the left often, the contemporary left, whatever we want to call it, often abandons moral questions or is very uncomfortable around moral questions because it thinks that morality is either bourgeois or that morality will be sorted out at some point after the revolution. Meanwhile, we have not only forms of exploitation and oppression, which do require, I would say, moral courage to address and acknowledge, but also in their differentiation, right? So I'm very opposed to, how to put it, like techno fixes for natural questions, right? So if we're talking about human reproduction, every single human being today is the product of a man or a woman, right? In some sense, even if one of those parents is dead, even if one of the parents was, their sperm removed, and the person doesn't know their father. I mean, this is also a question for psychoanalysis, by the way. Psychoanalysis no longer exists in any meaningful sense in relation to its own history if we eliminate or erode sexual difference, and if we eliminate or erode the relationship of the child to the parents, right? And I think we are potentially ushering in an era of new untold horrors and monstrosities under the guise of seemingly lovely things like choice and, you know, freedom and reproductive like potentiality, you know, and it's not, I think, reactionary or conservative or right-wing or fascist or anything like that to be concerned about that. And it's actually really a theoretical question at the level of, do we save these disciplines? Do we think that psychoanalysis still has something to tell us? For example, or do we think that second wave feminism still had a point? And also the critiques of Firestone. Do we think, how does technology relate to being a man or a woman? You know, we're still fundamentally the same kind of creatures as our ancestors were, you know, despite our fantasies. That we're somehow post-human, or, you know, and so this question, modernity, again, to go back to this, it's like, you know, which bits, why, when, and how, and where, like, you know, and how do we politically code these things? Because it seems to me a lot of what the parts of the contemporary left are proposing are completely in hoc to capitalist ideology of the individual, of choice, of, you know, various technologies. You know, they're not on the side of working class people at all. You know, if you think about who the surrogates really are, like surrogates are poor women in poorer parts of the world who are having their wombs rented out for like small amounts of money so that, you know, childless couples in the West can have children, quote unquote. You know, I mean, that's reality.
So I guess I want to just say one point of order here, Daniel, because I want you to get your time, is that
I got about 15 minutes, but go ahead.
Oh, that's amazing. So first of all, we've got Ashley Frowley, who does a lot of research on the family, joining tomorrow to kick off tomorrow's conversation. You're both invited to the after party. Just look at the schedule. You're able to come back then. And we might schedule something special as a kind of follow-up later this week. Just let me know what your availabilities are.
Okay.
And then the last thing to the point of order is that Adam and Nance in the live chat here have been keeping an eye on the live chat while listening to what's going on here. And so they will have questions for you both. And we're going to start with Daniel. And Daniel, I really don't want you to think that we're going to just mischaracterize you in your absence once you go off on vacation with your family. I want you to know that I won't allow anyone in the chat or anyone else just to dunk on you in your absence. I'm not for that at all. But I want you to just say your piece. Nina, say one response to that, and then we'll get to take a couple questions from Nance and Adam, starting with Daniel because you only have 15 minutes. So let's go.
Yeah. Look, I think that a big thing the New Left put forward was a theory of the commune, of the family as a kind of alternative structure of kind of implicit critique of the hierarchies and the deleterious effects of hierarchies of patriarchal family that come from the bourgeois family. And I actually do critique the commune at the same time that I try to differentiate a kind of bourgeois or middle class experimentation in the commune, really relying a lot on Ellen Wills's firsthand experience with the failure of New Left communes, which we should be honest were very much a failure. What I'm seeing in my conversations with a lot of family abolitionists today is a much more abstractly militant sense. So, for example, there's a desire for the eradication entirely of the structure of the father, which is something that I'm deeply opposed to if you read my work. I think that Lacan actually has a quite sound conception of the modern status of the father as itself already post-patriarchal, right? So I think that there's a misnomer about the way that the authority of the father actually functions that Lacan helps us to clarify. So that's something that I have introduced in his notion of the name of the father, which I get into, which I do think that the notion of the name of the father should not be construed as a rigidly conservative doctrine of the strong preservation of sexual difference. That's a whole other conversation that we can have there. I don't think that psychoanalysis is structurally or necessarily conservative on the question of sexual difference. I don't know, Nina, how you would parse that question, but I certainly think that in theory, left psychoanalytic thinkers, even Wilhelm Reich, more contemporary left psychoanalytic thinkers like Patricia Garavici and her work actually do open up a lot of very useful reflections about gender anormativity and things of that, which we can discuss. But I think in general, my position on all of this is that I don't think that family abolitionists have a strong connection to like the ruling class as a sort of ideology. I'm not really worried about that. I think that it is much more a question of clarifying in the realm of theory what we actually mean by that tradition. Do we have any commitment to it? Should we have any commitment to it? And so that was my gesture, which is just to sort of open up a dialogue. And I've had a chance to do that in some cases, but because of the strained status of our public sphere today, it's been super difficult to actually have these conversations. So that's what I would say in response to what Nina recently said, but I think Nina actually hasn't answered my earlier question, which I do want to invite you to do, if it's okay, which is, yeah, like you were affiliated with a lot of far-left communist theoretical lineages, and I do think that you didn't give me a compelling account as to how you shifted away from those, or if there was a meaningful shift for you from those. Because I've made a bit of a shift, which I've tried to articulate on this stream, like how I've shifted a little bit. focus more on working class, focus more on Lukács, focus more on the rationalist tradition, more of a critic of postmodernist philosophy, etc., etc. But I was sort of curious how that shift worked for Nina.
Sure. I mean, I think like as with everybody's life, there is like on the one hand, like a theoretical set of interests, which I've tried to say included like second wave feminism, anti-work ideas in particular, also Badiou, like you say. I mean, I was interested in like, I don't know, 10 different things. I mean, I've written like, I don't know, 50 essays on like or whatever. I mean, and sometimes there's a kind of eclecticism in that. I'm very motivated to try to understand what is happening, how best to conceptualize it. I was thinking maybe we hand over our thinking of infinity to maths, or maybe that's one way we can overcome the romantic lineage, thanks to Veggie, whatever. In my late 20s I was thinking about this a lot, and I suppose there was a kind of crisis point for me in that merged my political activism, as it were, which was tied up with free education, which is something I'm very committed to. Like we already talked about pedagogy and post, power academics, and because that was my political awakening or something like this. I was very, very mobilized by the student movement 2009, 2010. In the UK, we lost that battle. I was then very involved in defending people in court and supporting Alfie in particular, who was almost killed by the police and then was on trial for 4 years. And there were lots of things then going on, right? Like around 2013, 2014, that I wasn't really totally aware of. I didn't really kind of understand. And this was like, maybe we could talk about the, I don't know, like a kind of a neo civil rights seeming movements around identity, in particular, that to my mind were like kind of baffling, because I knew that we were criticizing the state, we were criticizing the courts, we were criticizing the police, and all of these forms of like authoritarianism, and also the way in which the state divides people up. And we were working with people who have been victims of police violence, as well as thinking about immigration, asylum, and so on. And then suddenly there was this kind of shift, it seemed to me, or maybe it was already going on, to questions that were not really led by economic matters or about an understanding of the national whole or the global picture, but rather were this kind of I don't know, like symptom of something else. And I tried to tie it to your question of Lacan and responsibility and authority in the name of the father. I mean, I agree with this, right? I've written at length a few pieces about, I think after Juliet Flower McCannell's work on the regime of the brother, that actually we live in a post-patriarchal age that is characterized actually by a flattening of the sexes in terms of like a Republican sibling rivalry. That there is, what's happened is also a collapse of the relationship between men and women, however you want to conceive it, right? And whatever you think about patriarchy, whatever you think about these things, we no longer live in that era. Like these are not capitalist subjects. People talk about patriarchy, but they're not actually referring to patriarchy, because the real dimension of patriarchy, which is historically important, is not authority, it's not oppression, it's responsibility. Right. And what we have is an era of like complete abandonment of responsibility. Right. And that's one of the crucial questions. And this goes for class analysis. This goes for political organizing. We've all become post-60s liberal, hedonistic, Reichian subjects, in fact, mobilized by our desire, because desire is the most important thing after all. Right. And we've got to follow our desire, and this has created a society which is functionally chaotic. Right. Where nobody wants to say the party's over, guys. Clear up. You see what I mean?
I do. I mean, I agree with the general thesis. And I mean, I think someone like Lash is somebody that I've tried to reintroduce as a dignified thinker for American left socialism. And part of what I'm interested in is sort of getting these conversations out of the culture war polemics that declarify them and that mystify the real stakes, right? So that we can actually start to discuss things like the Oedipus complex and how it actually fits within, like, because there is a sense in which people will try to convince you that we're post-Oedipal. And I couldn't disagree with that more. I mean, it kind of goes back to this question about the philosophical clarity of how theory meets the real world, right? But I think with that, Nina and I would probably disagree about perhaps the value of left-wing psychoanalysis once we push down into that, perhaps. But I think we would agree that, I mean, yes, I do follow Philip Reif's suggestion that we live in Wilhelm Reich's universe in some sense, and Reich ended his project in a way that was quite telling as to this organ accumulation, this kind of new age sense. It was almost like a kind of bad Nietzschean will to power, right? And perhaps that's what he was all about all along, right? Perhaps it was naive to think that communist society will give us a world. This is what he thought, right, in his lectures to the Soviet Union, that communist society will kill the Oedipus complex, because the Oedipus complex is just a bourgeois thing. I don't think that's actually true. And I actually think that Lacan proves that is not the case. Even in his later work, where he's making observations, he's refining what that means. But I think that, yes, these sunk features of rivalry are a useful way to think about social and political conflict. Because in a sense, the Oedipus complex never really leaves the political field. And if that's true, politics becomes centrally about questions of unconscious rivalry. Not so much.
And the economic system basically creates this too. You know, men and women are basically interchangeable economic units, right? Everybody knows this, right? There's nothing to differentiate us if you want to talk about distinction from a certain perspective. You know, I mean, maybe, sorry, just to flip around a tiny bit, just to like be really, really clear on my, you know, political trajectory, because I didn't quite sort of finish saying, like, you know, so what happened in like 2018 was like the Labour Party, of which I was a member, you know, like I'm saying, I joined because of Jeremy Corbyn, you know, started holding all of these interrogations of women, female members of the party who wanted to have discussions about the proposed changes to the Gender Recognition Act. And it wasn't even the content of the policy that bothered me at first. It was the fact that these women were being interrogated and ostracized and deplatformed and kicked out of the party for even raising questions. And from the standpoint of a democratic system, ostensibly or nominally, of course, we know the limitations of thinking in this way, particularly when we understand how state violence works, is to say, like, for God's sake, really? You're going to shut these women up for asking a fucking question about a policy? Like, come on. So I was really just appalled, really, at this kind of, like, I don't know how to put it. It was kind of like Stasi, Orwellian, you know, all of these trite ways we talk about politics, but there was an aspect of it which was so sadistic and so unnecessary. And that set the tone, unfortunately, for this discussion for years. And we're still seeing it. You know, this is a discussion that touches on the deeper inner parts of people in this kind of brutal way. And people are manifesting all kinds of violence, linguistically and socially, politically and physically, over this question of what we, you know, whether we, I don't know, how we are to understand what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, what sex is, what, you know, it's created havoc. Look, there's a psychoanalytic reading to be done on the last, like, 5 years, in order to come to terms with it, because it, you know, something has gone very badly wrong. And I, right from that moment, and all I wanted to do was for people to be able to have a conversation about it, and for people to express from all positions their feelings. You know, I tried to recreate encounter groups. Do you remember these? This was a big thing in the 70s, where you bring people together, like black and white, men and women, people who had opposing views, right? Or, you know, or wanted to basically give people like an unsafe space. I mean, a safe space within bounds, right? No violence, no threats of violence, but people could say whatever they wanted, right? Like in a way to draw out these kind of prejudices or unconscious feelings, things that you're not allowed to say. And we live in a completely restricted, increasingly restricted, censorious, self-censoring, Foucault was right, You know, that's how you control people. You get them too afraid to even think. And we tried to do this. We tried to do this at R.D. Laing's Institute in London. You know, anyone can come. Let's talk about these things, you know. And of course, it ended in disagreement.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
one of the big things I write about in my book on the family is what I call a new paternalism. And I try to historically periodize that in the arc, which I think is a very materialist analysis and a way to do so, of financialization, right? So financialization has created mechanisms that actually pervert this Freudian Oedipal drama. But at the same time, the structure of the family after the sexual revolution and the New Left has kind of deprived us of the old stable forms of paternal figures to passageway out of this. So it's kind of a very perverse paternalism, which we see on college campuses. We see it's a paternalism that has in many ways become inverted as a way of a kind of hyper individualist form of thinking, even things like liberation. It perverts the possibility of collective liberation. Somebody actually recently told me that you can't really call it a paternalism because the ideology is post-paternal, right? So to even suggest to bring back a centrality of like the function in a structural sense of parents is perceived as reactionary. I don't think that it has to be, though.
No.
I think that that's a misnomer to even conceive of that. I know that everyone on this stream would probably agree with that,
right?
But there are a lot of people on the left that don't agree with that. So how are we going to talk to them? How are we going to work through that dynamic? Is a question for me.
Well, this is why next year, once Mikey's main work gets published here, we're gonna have a time of really diving into Baudrillard, because he's got a reading of Baudrillard, an interpretation of Baudrillard, a history of Baudrillard that you're not going to be familiar with, that no one's familiar with. It's radical and outside of anybody's wheelhouse, and it's important, and I can't really talk about it because I'm sworn to secrecy. But I would just say, like, at the very superficial level that you would be familiar with, simulation and simulacra, right? This is the world of this digital media and things like gender and paternalism and anything that may have somehow existed in some way is now simulated, and people take those simulations to be the things themselves, whether we ever had access to those things themselves, whether those were ever real, whether those have been retroactively projected onto the past.
But they don't do so unconsciously. That's the whole point, which is why the Freudian proposition remains pertinent, right?
It's not done unconscious?
Lacan will create a whole sophisticated theory of this as well, and when he has the non-duped heir. Nina may be familiar with the non-duped heir, but it's this kind of society to come that he sort of prophesizes, in which people no longer fall in love with their unconscious because they've been told not to believe in it. So in a sense, post-Lacanian psychoanalysis has been about how we create a new love for our unconscious. And that's actually what therapy, psychoanalytic therapy, does. It's a kind of way to demonstrate that we are unconscious, that we are driven by the unconscious. Because Lacan recognized, and this goes back to the financialization piece, that the material forces of our society, of what he called the capitalist discourse, actually erode the efficacy of the unconscious in some sense. So I would even say that there's actually a spiritual dimension to this of belief. Why do you think Slavoj is so interested in the category of belief in our time? It has to do with this erosion, in my view, which you see in the later Lacan all over the place. Why does Lacan talk about religion so much? It's because of this, because he thought capitalism was killing psychoanalysis and that religion might replace it. He literally thought that, right? I don't know where we're at with religion these days, but psychoanalysis is coming back.
For sure.
So is religion.
So is religion.
Well, religion's been coming back for a while. I feel like it's kind of ebbing.
But I mean, I always refer like Walter Benjamin's fragment on capitalism as religion as the party that never ends. I mean, I think he gets it right. It's like the religion without dream, without mercy. Like you can't sleep, but you can't dream either. It's like the 3 a.m. eternal, as KLF put it, right? It's like that's what it's like.
Well, that's an essay actually about Nietzsche's eternal return.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But there's no day of rest, right? You don't even get the Sunday off anymore.
No. Yeah, that brings us back to the leisure question, right? Which is a big worry, which is that maybe we could say in a speculative sense there's a kind of correlation between this a lack of a belief in the unconscious to a collapse in the desire for leisure, because we no longer have the coordinates. We're sort of disoriented fundamentally about the desire for otium, which goes back, I think, to our original point of like the politics of leisure is a politics of a different type of desire. It's not a Wilhelm Reich desire, I would say. You know what I'm saying? That Nina just mentioned, this kind of like pure liberation thing. Slightly different than that.
The important point. This is my self-promotional little.
I don't know
moment.
if that makes sense to you.
Hello. Am I coming through? Okay. So basically, we're about to turn it over to the question and answers with everybody, and I really just hope we can continue the conversation in the future. Adam and Nance are about to turn on their cameras here, but I just got to say, as a sort of a quilting point for the whole conversation, that for me, it's the time energy theory. Part of why it matters, it doesn't just come out of reading early Marx, right? It doesn't just come out of like my time doing Bernie activism or whatever. It comes from being functionally illiterate prior to college, having worked for a decade in the workforce, and then discovering concepts, right? And that was transformative for me. And maybe not everybody needs it in the way that I needed it. And some people need other things, like to be able to play and practice on the piano or the violin. There's a lot of, to be multilingual. There's a lot of different things that mountains somebody might climb from base camp, if we actually had a base camp secured that provided time energy. But the reason time energy is important as a concept, as a technical concept, it's not just speaking to a phenomenon that I believe is an existential structure of our being in the world, which it is. Obviously, with my thesis, it comes out of critiquing Marx and Heidegger with one another imminently. But the main point is just like when you're talking to a working class person, look, some of them get it. I want leisure time. Some of them get it. There's things that they already want to do, right? But leisure is not inherently attractive to everybody in the working class. Time energy is. And it's intuitive enough that even without the conceptual distinctions and stipulations that are developed in Waypoint and my next book, Time Energy, that's coming, it's intuitive enough that they basically know what they're talking about, right? Time energy is time and energy. Of course, stipulating it's important, and it's not just repeatable blocks of energy-infused time, which is the opposite of time without energy, right? Or energy without repeatable time. But more importantly, like putting it in those terms makes people realize why Adam Smith's vision for public libraries and public education isn't going to be able to fulfill or deliver on the promise. The promise was workers are going to be able to educate themselves at the libraries and universities on their free time. But this is a way of looking at all time as equal. One of the good things that Byung-Chul Han has done with his The Scent of Time is talk about the fundamental difference between point time, which is what we have in capitalism, and this kind of time that's more communal and repeatable. He says ritual. And so I wanted to kind of bring it all back around to that, to just say, I believe that the technical term matters, and that people, I've tried to make this book freely available to everybody. It's right here on the screen. If you just go to theory-underground.com/waypoint, it's all the chapters are there for free, and you can also listen to it. I read it aloud, so you can listen to it from work. And it just matters to me that people who are fellow travelers are able to get a basis in the conversation, because for the next 5 years, I'm not trying to have a general conversation with the masses. I'm not trying to have a niche conversation with academics. I'm trying to have a conversation with people who kind of get it. And what I can say about you both is that I really appreciate you for being here as long as you both have, because I think that you both do kind of get it, because I think our shared common reference point, not the audiences that we try to speak to, but the values that we care about. I think that there's enough overlap here that it's worth it, that the contradictions are worth fleshing out. So thank you. Adam and Nance can now turn on their cameras and microphones. And if you both have things you want to add to what I just said, you can incorporate it into your answers. But we're going to prioritize Daniel Tutt for the next 7 minutes. So any questions for the both of you? Daniel, you do them first because I know you got to go. And then Nina, you'll have about the same amount of time before we bring Christine Louis de Soli on.
Yeah, I mean, I've also got to go in 5 minutes as well. But
oh shit,
I'll try and be back another time. But anyway, let's hand over to Daniel.
So yeah, I mean, I'm happy that Nina came on. There's been, obviously drama that we discussed before about the interview that I did with her. This has been a rich conversation. I think that part of the downside of the hysteria of our current moment is that richer conversations get prevented from being even had. So you ambushed me, Dave, but it worked out. It's all good. I'm not upset or anything like that. It actually probably was for the best. So just do I have any? Is your question? Do I have any questions for Nina, or do I have any questions about Timenergy? What exactly?
No, Nance is going to ask the questions. He's going to be relaying questions from chat because he's one of the moderators. Please. I would just say the ambush, it was not intentional. She was originally coming on for the prior portion, for the launch party portion, but I do appreciate, this is like an answer to prayer almost, So anyway, Nance, what's up?
So it looks like we did have a pressing question from Lewis for Daniel. How to actualize this revolutionary threat within the confines of failed initiation, and how to conceive the sacred core of the family in our confrontation with the ruling class.
In my book, I put forward a theory of what I call subjects of counter-initiation, which are sort of a way for me to think along a Marxist class mode of analysis, especially thinking new. One thing I'm interested in is moving. I think that the category of the lumpen proletariat has materially changed in recent times since 2008, and no longer is it only to be thought as a kind of it's to be precise. It's a sunk feature within and across the existing working class, and so. Within that, I was trying to put forward the idea of what does it mean for subjects who basically have a more socialized version of the family. If neoliberalism, in a sense, for working class and lumpen, and I'm interested in lumpen, of course, from my own personal experience, because I see my own family as composed of both working and lumpen elements, which you may sympathize with and resonate with, Dave. I don't know. What does it
I've got mixed feelings about the idolization of the lumpen proletariat, but I'm part of it, so yeah, fucking sure.
Well, I think it needs to be redefined is the point I'm trying to arrive at. But basically, in essence, what does it mean for folks that come into a kind of stunted Oedipal process? And what does this crisis of adulthood, this crisis of having the capacity to see our subjective life from the stages of concrete stages of development, if that's blocked to you, the question of my book is there anything possibly revolutionary about subjects that share that deprivation of initiation? And I say that Lacan argued that Oedipus is basically a theory of initiation. And so when Lacan says that our age is marked that age that I mentioned before that we're moving into. He says it's marked by a complete crisis over initiation. It doesn't mean that in some mystical, cryptic, or religious sense. He means it as a crisis over Oedipus itself. Right? So it's actually goes back to the family. That's what I argue. And
Nina said she's got to take off. Nina in the chat said she's taking off. So everyone say bye. Bye, Nina.
Okay.
Thank you for coming by.
Bye. I didn't want to interrupt Daniel again, but thank you for being such a good sport, Daniel. I appreciate and respect your time and for being able to cope with this, like, interpolation or whatever you want to call it. And
Sure.
Thank you, Dave, for the last minute invite and, respect to you all. And bye.
Bye.
Bye, Nina. So
Okay.
yeah, I got to bounce in a moment too, but basically, my sense is that you'd have to read the book to see, but I try to show that if working class struggle doesn't organize well with its own lumpenizing potentials, which we also have to understand psychoanalytically, that psychoanalysis allows us to see how lumpenization poses a danger to solidarity, cross-class solidarity, which is not a problem of the PMC, which we're usually focused on. It's a different problem. So I try to get at that. I don't have any immediate solutions to that, but that's just sort of what Luis is kind of referring to. But I don't have any immediate solutions at this time. Or rather, if I did, it would take me a long time to elaborate them, unfortunately, Dave.
Have you read that conversation with the Maoists when Foucault was kind of post-Maoist? It was called what is it? Power and Knowledge, the anthology.
Yeah.
Because
I have read that. Yes.
I think it's a really good example of one of the really big, powerful ways that the working class divides its own self from the lumpen proletariat in kind of outside of any thought of the PMC, right? Right. It's obviously you've got elements that want to become petty bourgeois. You got elements that want to become PMC. You got elements that are just happy being workers. But the part Foucault's focusing on is the way the judicial system reinforces the sense of, oh, I'm a good worker, as opposed to you don't deserve a real secure job because you've been bad. Yeah. Is that kind of what you're talking about, or do you go in a different direction here?
What I'm talking about is that it foments a capacity for an unconscious paternalism amongst the lumpen working class. So, like, basically, if the paternal function is deprived to the working class, then they're going to seek its replacement in institutions. And that means that we need a new literacy for how to combat institutional paternalism. Because what's revolutionary about Freud's theory of Oedipus for the left is that Freud says we can overcome institutional Oedipal hang-ups and dependencies. Like, say you're raised in a conservative family and all you know is a kind of weird patriotism, which you never, let's say you never get the opportunity to question or challenge it. That's a kind of, that's an Oedipal hang-up. So psychoanalysis is revolutionary in that sense because it allows you to break from institutional dependencies. It's a theory of dependency theory.
I got
right?
you.
And so the lumpen proletariat is more prone, they're more sensitive to needing that social paternalism because they've been deprived of it in their own family. That's what I was trying to theorize, if that makes sense.
Well, reading the introduction and watching your conversation with the Vanishing Mediators was enough for me to realize that you're more complicated of a thinker than my initial misgivings, and I really do appreciate you being here. And I'm gonna let you say your final closing bit, but I just want to say something for the Nina Power people out there, right? And that is that this is a space by and for renegade academics and working class intellectuals, autodidacts, burnouts, etc. But we also work with people who aren't renegades in like a strict sense. Like, Norman Finkelstein is a good example of a straight up like renegade PMC. But we got lots of people who work with your underground who are just professors, and they might have somewhat some kinds of insecurity that they're dealing with on tenure track. They might deal with a lot of the kinds of burnout and anxiety talked about on bullshit jobs because of the increases of academic busy work in the neoliberalization of the university and all of the stuff that we talk about. But I just want to say, like, I have had 3 conversations censored after the fact in the last 2.5 years where I brought leftists on. And these were leftists who already knew that I was sort of like, untouchable in various ways. And then they still worked, they still came on for a good faith conversation, but then they ended up saying something that they regretted after the fact. And they asked me to take down the stream or to edit something out of the stream. And here's the thing. I hate it in the moment, but I also understand the situation that you're in. And those decisions I'm not better than you because I'm not making those decisions. In a certain, I'm not more courageous because I'm not in those environments, and none of us are. And so you got to survive, and you got to do what you got to do. And so I just think, I just appreciate you for being able to hold the line here.
Good. I mean, I'm happy to be on, and I haven't regretted anything that has happened. And I thought it was interesting, dynamic, and probably good that it caught everybody off guard a little bit. So it was. I want to come back on. I do have to bounce because my ride's about to leave.
Cool.
Peace out. Have a great stream. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Nance, anything else you want to touch on from chat before we roll the PSA?
We did have some lively back and forth around nostalgia and nostalgia for lost futures and nostalgia for a past that never existed. And yeah, I mean, that's already what it is. But yeah, it was a great conversation. Great back and forth.
Cool. And have you read Lacan's concept of the phallus post?
Once again, that's another one that in bits and pieces, never all the way through. Adam and I are actually going to team up to do a co-reading of that soon. For real? You're going to do an exegetical reading of it? Well, we're going to try. That would be really cool. I'm going to make an achievement on the site for people who have done X amount of exegetical readings of The Dangerous Maybe specifically. And there will be a special badge for people who've done them all. Obviously, that's a tall order, but it's one of my own goals because I think people think I'm arbitrarily putting Mikey in the position of subject supposed to know, treating him like he's my theory teacher. Look, he's only my theory teacher on specific matters. There's a lot of things that I'm into where he's it's the other way around. I before building back a platform after I decided not to do theory plea really, I wanted to change the dynamic and not always have myself in the position of, I've got to figure it out and I'm a representative here, I'm an influencer. Instead being no, I'm a student for life, and the people I bring on, I bring them on to learn from just as often as I might contradict them or anything. But when I contradict them, it's so that I can get clarification. When I challenged Daniel Tutt on Marxism romanticizing a specific phase of the workers' movement, that's not spiteful. That's not meant to take him down a notch. That's meant to be some real food to think over and work through. And he'll send me resources to tarry with the negative, to work through the contradictions, not for synthesis, but for just learning, really. So anyway, but with all that said, the Dangerous Maybe blog is one that I stand heavily. And Mikey is Michael Downs, the instructor of the For They Know Not What They Do course. Also, if you go to the Theory Underground YouTube channel, you can scroll down and there's 2 playlists, Žižek 101, Lacan 101. If you want to do it chronologically, start with Lacan, then go to Žižek, because that's the order that they were recorded in. If you want the uncut versions of these, just become a $50 per month subscriber or fill out the financial aid scholarship in the PSA I'm about to roll. But the main thing is Mikey is a working class intellectual in the truest sense. He works in a warehouse. He's not able to join us today because he has to drive a truck, which is why when Todd McGowan joins, we're mainly talking about Mikey and Timenergy and the fact that it's bullshit that Mikey's life conditions have made it so that he's not freed up to do the work that he needs to do, which is sharing concepts for working class people.
He spent like 17 years studying philosophy 6 hours a day before he was forced into blue collar work. And now that he's been in blue collar work, it's like he just got to the point where he was ready to write his major work, and then he got forced into blue collar work. And that's good in a dialectical sense. It's going to make it that work something different than it would have been. And if you want to know about his work, his job, then you got to go read his article called Jouissance, Wage Labor and Jouissance, Why the Left Needs Žižek to Understand Workers. This is a powerful piece that will be featured prominently in the forthcoming Underground Theory Volume 1 volume. But the reason I have Lacan's concept of the phallus up on the screen here is because I don't want to talk about gender with someone who doesn't have this as a basis, right? When Judith Butler uses the concept of the phallus in Gender Trouble, she actually leaves out one of the registers, and she doesn't really think with this concept. She's just using it in this kind of way that a lot of academics will. And so I don't want to have a conversation with you about gender or sex unless you've read this. And then, of course, if you really want to go down that rabbit hole and kind of get away from reactionary tendencies or from naive progressivism, which kind of creates those reactionary tendencies, then you need to take the What is Sex course. And so Lacan's concept of the phallus combined with the What is Sex course, I think, are probably two of the most important things for really having a basis. I don't care if you agree with me in the future once you've done those things, but I want to have a basis for productive disagreement, and we ain't going to have that unless you've read and reread this piece that I'm pointing to on the screen, which is Lacan's concept of the phallus by the Dangerous Maybe. In it is long, but he exhaustively wrings out every example he can to make this concept the most accessible and intuitive that you will think with. And it's important because it has to do with everything in our lives. And I do believe that the case is made in this post. And so it's foundational. Definitely read it when you get the chance. Or you can sit here and click the button to listen to it. You just have to sign in, I guess. But with that, anything to say before we turn it over to the PSA? Perfect. All right, everybody. We'll be back shortly with Christine Louis de Soli. Dr. Christine Louis de Soli. 2 PhDs. One in the humanities, one in the biological sciences, to talk about identity politics left and right. Okay. See you all soon. Bye-bye.
And now a quick message from our sponsors. Just kidding. This will be neither quick nor from any corporate or state sponsorship.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a really special PSA, that is to say, public service announcement at Theory Underground. I am David McKerracher, and I'm with Nance and Ann here. And what we're here to talk about is the tour, the Theory Underground publications coming out here on September 2nd, and what we've been doing with the Hub event. And so we're going to start out with Nance reporting out on what's been going on with the Theory Underground Hub events. Welcome, Nance.
What's happening? So 13 hours ago, I jumped on my computer and logged into Zoom and all that stuff. And we started reading Julie Kristeva, right?
Yeah, we're reading some Kristeva.
Yeah. So this morning we read some Kristeva, and then we did a writer's workshop where we shared finished pieces or works in progress, read each other's work, kind of gave some critical feedback, and then we read the Old Chicago Style Guide. Then we did the multilingualism Spanish segment, and then we did an office hours segment and kind of like planning and organizing and housekeeping segment. And then after right now, we're going to go on into the multilingualism French segment. And that's just today. A couple of days ago, we did a similar thing with the Hub event where we actually launched 4 or 5 different groups, I think.
Social clubs that we've been talking about launching for a long time. Always kind of like, should we do this one? Should we do that one? The idea of the Hub event is we get to do them all, right?
Yeah. So it's really cool. We did film, we did an album listening group. We did the first time we did the French segment.
Did we do French and German
we
that
did
day?
the German and the French. We did German and French. Yeah. So we're doing 2-a-days with languages.
Yeah.
Last Tuesday, we kicked off the German and the French segments. And it's really cool to have people come in from the community that have a background and some knowledge in the languages we're learning, so we can have some guidance, a little mentorship. And we're launching all these groups that functionally are social groups, but they're also, I guess, forums for us to get outside of our environment and kind of interrogate our own presuppositions and deeply held beliefs a little bit, because we're not sitting there being the expert English speakers, or we're not sitting there being the Finn McKenty. We're not experts on the music we listen to. We're just people that interact with these things. And it's really cool. And it teaches us to be better learners. It teaches us to be better thinkers, and it teaches us to be better, actually productive members of a group, as opposed to just instrumentalized members of a group. There is some verticality there. We all do bring something unique to the table. And it's a give and take relationship. And it's really cool. It's a way to socialize and shoot the shit and reify the in-group and develop in jokes and jargon and blah, 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 blah. But it also is instructive in many ways. And it's really cool. And it is the case that we are doing a lot of the groundwork. We're kind of laying foundations for the really awesome people that may or may not see this. I don't know, they may come to it some other way, but the really awesome people that eventually will meet us and become parts of these groups, and they will kind of take on the roles that we fail to play right now because we're not experts. We're kind of just generalists, but it's really cool. We're prefiguring some really awesome stuff, and it's a really cool way to spend the time. I could be sitting around and jerking off and having a pity party for myself, but instead I'm like exponentially increasing my own awareness and my own horizons and all this stuff. And it's really cool. And it's awesome when people kind of stumble upon the groups and the segments and the clubs. Like, we've had a few people that they show up for one thing, they get the email for office hours, or they get the email for German or Spanish or the writer's workshop. And then they stick around for another segment, and they're like, oh, this is actually awesome. I'm going to stick around and I'm going to become a member of this group as well. So it's really, really cool. I love it. It's awesome. It's great.
Part of it's that the app officially has come out on Android and Apple stores. And so you're able to get the app, you're able to get into these social clubs. Most of the clubs, or most of the forums require, going through the courses first, but, no, not the social clubs. Social clubs are a way of mixing between what we're doing at the courses and things that we just need to be doing as a way of life, like practicing other languages. We have a health and fitness segment with the Swolitariat. Like, that's a lot of fun. And so someone who comes for the thing on Julius Kristeva, or they come for the Spanish thing, they end up staying for the health and fitness thing. And then we all end up diving into an actual event. We've already done surprise guest speakers. We've got really special segments that are going to go up on the channel publicly, but then we also have private segments that are recorded that just go up on specific forums. And the hub event, it's all one Zoom stream. I mean, it's not really a stream. It's one Zoom call, but it's just like a huge thing because Nance and I have the time, and we know everyone else doesn't have the time, but people are able to jump in. To kind of, to jump in, to pop in and out. And we want to kind of have a revolving door. And so working people, I got to go, my boss, whatever, got to go. Oh, but no, get a chance later to put the earbud back in, back in. And we're kind of preparing ourselves for a bunch of live broadcasting we'll be doing next year as well. And we're trying to make ourselves into the people that we want to be by doing all of these different things that we think that we do better with other people. And if you're only interested in writing, or if you're only interested in Spanish, or if you're only interested in film, then awesome. And you're welcome to just get involved with that. And if you decide to branch out into other stuff, then great. But if not, we'll have a lot of fun with you doing what you love. And that's why it's really cool that we've got French people, German people actually in these clubs. We didn't even plan on that yet. We ultimately want to be able to pay our Spanish and French tutor to be able to attend those events and actually help everybody. And maybe eventually we'll get a course up. But for the time being, we're kind of prefiguring all of that, just the way that Nance said. And so with that, though, yeah, thanks, Nance. It's been probably the coolest thing this year in terms of my own development as a thinker. I used to listen to a lot of books while playing video games, and I get a lot more out of the exegetical reading sessions that we do, to the point where I find video games boring. I think that what we're doing is a lot more exciting. And so, yeah, it's cool. And Anne has some news here about the first of the publications we're announcing, which is Underground Theory.
That is right. Y'all know it's coming out. You can order it on September 1st on theory-underground.com, or you can get it on Amazon, but it's going to be cheaper on Theory Underground, just saying. But the update is that I am in the process of proofreading this entire 400-something page book. I actually had to skip out on the Spanish meeting today because this is like the only thing taking up brain space for me. Kind of, because also it's like, because it's not a full-time job where I'm getting paid a salary or like $20 an hour to do it, I'm also like, I want to go cook a meal. I need to do my laundry. But all of that is to say, I've really truly been enjoying the process, not only the process of editing and proofreading. I personally find not meaning from it, I guess. I enjoy doing it. I've always enjoyed those meticulous tasks that a lot of people go, this is bullshit, I hate it, why do I have to do it? I'll do it, I'll be the person to do those things. But it's really fun to get to read this book that we've put together with people that we know in real life and people that we don't know in real life, and then people like freaking Slavoj Žižek. I've had email correspondences with Slavoj Žižek. I didn't know who he was 5 years ago. That's cool. So you can see in here, if I flip through the markups, just basic things. I'm not really fundamentally changing anything. It's kind of just, oh, there's an extra space there. Oh, there's a the missing there. Oh, that period needs to be there. It's meticulous and it's tedious, but this book's going to be dope. And Dave and I were just talking today about does this even need to happen? Can we just call it good as it is and get it sent to Amazon and print it as is? And there's reason, Dave has reasons for maybe why we want to do that on future books, or why that is kind of a resistance to the perfectionism of academia. But I also see why this is necessary. On the one hand, it's well, we've actually got people like Slavoj Žižek and Alenka Zupančič and Todd McGowan and people that we respect, and I want this work to just reflect their hard work, and I want it to reflect our hard work. And I want, for this especially, because it has the bigger names, I think there will probably be more eyes on it, and I want those people to see that you can produce quality work in the underground. That, yeah, it's tedious and meticulous and taking longer than we had hoped, but people are going to be impressed. They're going to go, oh wow, this is legit publication. Because then there's also the case to be made, well, no, this is the underground, and it's just about the ideas, and it doesn't matter. And for future books, maybe we'll experiment with that. But I think because we've just got so many names in this, and we never actually set that expectation in the first place, and didn't tell people, you need to get this proofread on your own. It's there are pieces in here where I don't even think the author proofread them themselves, and it's that's fine. I think some people are just used to having other eyes on it, and I just want everyone's best foot forward in this book. I want everyone to look good in this book and not have a reader, because the readers that we want are gonna just not care and just be focused on the ideas, but realistically someone is going to read it and go, wait, this sentence doesn't make sense, or oh, there's double periods there. It's like in a show on theater, like there's always some mistake, but people are attracted to the mistakes rather than the like actual performance that's going on, or the distraction. And so for this first volume that has some big names, I just want to make it awesome. And so I'm in the process. I'm getting close. I think I can be done soon and have it up in Amazon and ready to print. But it's just been like physically reading it and writing things down with different colored pens because I don't know, that's fun. And then going and sitting and going through and doing the edits on a document. And you might be wondering, well, and why not just do it on the computer in the first place? Because I hate reading on screens. I know this is taking twice as long, or kind of like maybe, I don't know, 10.5 times as long, but I don't care because the work is more quality when I'm reading it in the text, and just to see the errors and see how it looks is cool. So this book's going to be as best as it can be, having been, proofread, first look through by Marilyn Lawrence, who fixed the footnotes and fixed a lot of errors, and she's been like absolutely incredible and essential in this. And then Dave proofread some of them, and I've done like the bulk of the proofreading of just the fixing little errors. And so I hope it is reflected in that. But also, like, I didn't go to school for proofreading and editing. I have no real credentials other than I learned how to write an essay in 6th grade, and then I learned some grammar throughout high school. And then I Google things constantly. I'm like, where does the colon go in the Chicago style? That's my qualifications, but it'll be cool. So that's what I've been working on. I'm excited for people to get their hands on this thing. You can hurt someone with this, or you can blow your mind with this.
You also, part of your expertise is that you did grade people's papers in the university. And so did I. And so that matters.
I had professors who actually were like cared more about the grammar than the content. But yeah, I was also like, I worked in the university. I got accepted into conferences. Like I have some legit, I wrote a research paper, so I know what I'm doing.
Yeah, and part of the issue with this idea of underground theory, it's like, okay, by calling it underground theory, we are playing off the idea that you work with what you got and you got to get it out there and you got to do it yourself because you're not in an institution. You're not relying on the institution. You are short circuiting the process. You're breaking through those walls. But also it's not just a get rich quick scheme like some of these underground people we see doing stuff where they're just constantly like trying to sell you. We just got to sell you books so that we can get drunk and drive around. And it's like, no, that's not what we're actually trying to make a difference here. We actually believe that this is the beginning of a discourse that's going to be more than just our little local, like, oh, we're just having fun. Like, yeah, we're going to have fun, but we're going to have fun because we're also doing stuff that we think matters. And we're the kind of people who can't have fun unless we're also doing something that we think matters. And then in what ways does it actually matter? In what ways does it actually change the world? And well, these are big questions, and people can argue about it all day. But I do believe that a big part of it for the three of us is Timenergy theory. And the first book on it is the second book that we are publishing on September 2nd. And it really just, these are the two books that we're talking about on tour. And so we have currently, when we're recording this, it is August 24th, 2023. So we've got 8 days until launch. And then we actually start driving across the country. Right. And so we're going to give you a quick rundown here on the tour itself. On September 2nd, Slavoj Žižek is coming to Boise in the flesh. He's going to literally be there at the Xanadu building in Boise. Just kidding, he's not. But he'll be joining us over Zoom to sort of commemorate the occasion and to give us his clout, because ultimately he thinks the idea of some blue collar and working class thinkers doing theory and getting out there and getting people into philosophy and stuff in the States, which is like the most anti-intellectual climate in the world today, is important. It matters. And so that's really awesome. We appreciate that. And so that's something that people will be able to see. We will post it online, but there will also be a Zoom call. And there are tickets for the Zoom call available in the description down below. And then if the one free way to participate is just to actually be there in the flesh. And so we are prioritizing the people who actually show up. I'm going to introduce Mikey. Mikey's going to introduce Slavoj Žižek. Mikey's going to explain why he thinks Slavoj Žižek is such an important philosopher, and that will be in a lot of cases people's first introduction to Slavoj Žižek. I think that Mikey is specially equipped to talk about the relevance of some of his concepts and why they're useful to a blue collar warehouse worker in Raytown, Missouri. After we interview him on some really interesting questions, trust me, there's going to be presentations from the three of us, as well as Elton and Brian. After that, we're headed to Colorado, and we're going to see Philip, who's been in courses with us. He's got a piece that's in Underground Theory. It's a really great piece on the state of education and what he hopes will actually help improve it. And we'll be getting together in Breckenridge, September 5th through the 7th. The event will probably be on the 6th. And we'll probably be doing other cool stuff, but we're not going to publicize all of it in this PSA. Then we're going to go see Mikey September 10th in Raytown, Missouri. You see, that's where I have the barbecue on the map, and that's because it's Kansas City, right? And so we're going to do Kansas City with Mikey. But the public thing that you're all invited to is actually at a really cool indie bookstore called Prosperos. And so information on that coming soon, but it'll be on Saturday, the 10th. September 13th, we will be in Ontario, an hour outside of Kingston, at the McLuhan Institute with Andrew McLuhan, as well as the Solitariat, aka Eamon Stephen. And he's also, by the way, our fitness and health coach. Right. So it's really exciting that he's going to be there and that he'll be presenting on things as well. But this will be kind of like the critical media theory focused event of the tour. And then, and this is all still kind of coming together like last minute. Everything about this is Tour Zero. Could you explain what that means, Nance?
So Tour Zero is an opportunity to get out and it's like on the job training. Do the thing, but also fail, because failure is always going to happen, but learn from our failures. And it's not that there's less pressure, but there's a different kind of pressure, a different kind of public pressure. The pressure will be more coming from inside the house rather than being concerned with spectacularly failing and everybody writing it off as just a bunch of dickheads from the internet.
Right.
Which is why it's Tour Zero rather than Tour 1. Because the next one will be better.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. And so, in pretty record time, I've been able to throw this thing together. And I've done that with a lot of things that I've done in the last year. But I'm just interested in making a splash with Theory Underground in the first year so that people who see what it could be get involved. And so then we're really excited about this one. We're going to be meeting Todd McGowan himself. We're going to get together at University of Vermont. There's going to be presentations. He's going to present, but he won't be the keynote because he said that would be weird at his own university, which makes sense. But we get to hear him present on the continued relevance of German idealism and why it matters. And I'm just really stoked about that. And we're all going to be presenting on our thoughts on related issues. And then New York City, we're going to be seeing Samuel Loncar, Norman fucking Finkelstein, and Russ Brigula. And so
Norman X. Finkelstein, you fascist.
Yeah, that's right. Norman X. Finkelstein, which is how he put his name on the newest book I'll burn that bridge when I get to it. And he'll probably be presenting on his problems with identity politics, his radical left critique of it, but also he might be presenting on the Democrats and their failure to do diplomacy, and how he thinks that both sides of the political spectrum are trying to build up for a nationalist world war, or an imperialist world war, we could say. So that's another thing that is going to be fascinating. Then we're going to probably dip into DC before we go back to the other side of the coast. And we've got several people that we're talking to or with about doing all kinds of things, but we kind of want to keep it vague because some of the things we're doing is for a documentary. That's a super secret project. No one gets to know about it until later. But also, we're doing some things like going to see a Broadway play. We're all going to go see Gutenberg in New York City on, what is it, like the 15th, right?
15th or 16th. Yeah, one of those nights. It's a new musical. It's only on Broadway for 20 weeks. It's Josh Gad and Andrew Reynolds, who were the original Elder Price and Elder Cunningham in the Book of Mormon. And it's supposed to be super funny. And it's also about the inventors of the printing press. So it's kind of relevant to like critical media theory and Marshall McLuhan. And it'll be interesting to see the content, but also it's apparently hilarious. And I'm excited.
Yeah, it's going to be really cool. And then we'll also do probably a couple others, as well as a couple of museums. And a lot of that's, if people want to get involved with that, it's just going to be word of mouth. And so you just have to kind of get with us, because these are not just consumable things on demand. We're kind of making the point that just doing stuff with people in real life is more important than just being sort of existing in videos or podcast stuff where people just have you on demand. It's like, no, actually sharing space and making time for one another. Like it's real shit. And that's the whole point. People were like making fun of the original description of what's in this volume because it used the word real. I think that's an important word. And I think that there's some people who just don't care about keeping it real. And that's just why we do what we do. So then we're going to go on to Chicago for a Platypus special event they're putting on for us, where we're all going to present. Catrone will present. And who knows how that's going to go. But basically, we're going to spend a lot of time thinking about what we're going to present at this thing. And until it actually happens, we're going to keep it pretty hush-hush. But you'll be able to see the Facebook and the website and the meetup events as they develop. And so there will be more information on all of these soon. But then we're going, and by the way, for people who are like, well, I thought that this was all happening like through September and October, we decided to do it all in September because we decided this is tour 0. So then secret surprise thing in Denver. So stay tuned. That'll be September 24th or 25th. Catherine Liu is getting with us on September 26th or through the 27th in LA. And there's also a big secret and surprise thing that's going on in LA that Nance's grinning because he knows. Oh yeah. And you know, the thing I told you off camera, I talked to the producer of the show remember? Yeah. So it's exciting. And then we're going to go to the Vegas Punk Museum, and Nance is going to give us a tour of the fucking thing, which is just, to me, I've always been fascinated by this subculture. It's had a lot of influence on the left. It's had a lot of influence on hardcore. It's had a lot of influence on underground scenes everywhere. And so it's historically fascinating, but also arguably a dead end. And so there's this whole like argument we're having amongst ourselves about its relevance. Is being compared to punk or underground stuff in the first place even a compliment, or is it actually kind of a self-own? We're open to it being a self-own. We're actually kind of self-aware that a lot of people are taking this stuff more seriously than they should in the wrong ways. And we're taking parts of it more seriously that nobody actually takes seriously or tends to underestimate, right? So we're trying to do something here, and people will hopefully kind of get the sense for what it is that we're developing with all of that here on this tour. And then we're going to Reno. There's going to be a film club special. I used the thumbnail from our last film club meeting. That's not actually the one we'll be doing there. That one's going to be a surprise. And it will only be public if we find a public location. Otherwise, it'll probably just be 7 of us back at a private residence. Finally, Ashlyn, October 1st, slacklining. We're just literally doing a slacklining focused event, and sure, we'll have the books there and we'll talk about them, but this will be advertised on Meetup as well as Facebook as a slacklining event. And the point is to just kind of get in your body, find balance, breathe, and we'll do a whole thing on balance and why it matters there. But it's, all a way of kind of integrating aspects of life and bringing a sort of balance to ourselves who are otherwise super siloed into consumer niche demographics for consumerism. Then Portland, Burnside Powell's, potentially a clubhouse. Somebody is currently trying to reserve for us the clubhouse at some place. So stay tuned for that. And then we're going to be probably doing something in Seattle, it looks like, with J.M. Adams of the New Center for Research and Practice, as well as potentially a couple of Jay's friends. And it looks like there's actually a DSA chapter there who wants to bring us. I find that super interesting. Like, I'm going to give them my critique of the left, basically. I'll present it to them. And at the same time, lend them encouragement, because at least one of the things that I know that they're doing, I think is fundamentally important, regardless of what you believe in or who you're affiliated with. They are doing some mutual aid kinds of activities there that seem cutting edge, according to the conversation I had with somebody. And so that's exciting. And then this is tentative, but I think we're doing something with Bruce Bierman back in Spokane, and that'll end the tour. And so that's the whole thing. We're going to basically have it all done within a month's time. We just got a minivan for doing this. It's going to be the three of us, and we're just excited to meet some people from the internet, to meet some old friends, and to see what we can do with getting these ideas spread more widely, getting people Timenergy pilled, helping people realize that they don't have to go through academia to still get a quality education and to be developing themselves as a thinker in their own right, as a way of life, as a longer term project that only gets better as you get older, instead of tapering off and then you have a miserable last 30 years of your life. You're actually developing yourself to be able to intervene in your prime intellectually, right? And to be at your best between your 60s and 80s. Like that's actually what philosophy is for becoming someone who has something to say and someone who other people want to hear from. And that's not something that you're going to get at the age of 20, at the age of 30, at the age of 40. It's something that only comes after 20 to 40 years of study and research and real dialectical engagement with the world. And, we're serious about it. We think it's going to be great and fun. Anybody have anything that they want to say is close? Ryan Gosling will be with us. Not the actor. Not the actor. This kitty that Anne is holding is Ryan Gosling. He will be with us. In some cases, he will be camping in the van overnight, and I'll probably sleep with him those nights because in some cases, he won't be able to stay inside where we're at because some people are allergic, and that's too bad because he's the most precious kitten in the world.
That's like about as bad as being allergic to, no, not allergic, but having that gene that makes cilantro taste like soap. Like being allergic to cats, like, I'm sorry, you're looking out.
Well, you don't.
I don't fuck with cats, and I never felt like I was missing out until I met Ryan Gosling. He's the cutest puppy in the world.
Aw, and he likes puppies, so that's quite the compliment. Yeah, Anne didn't used to like cats too much either, so we're all into them now. It's a thing that comes.
If anyone wants to know about our James philosophy of cats, let us know.
Once you've grown up, you'll understand. No, yeah, I'll write that book eventually. But all right, for now, we're excited to see you all on the road. And right now, we're just kind of frantically doing all of the things and falling behind and still somehow getting it done. And we're putting off some of our courses until later, just to give ourselves a little bit of breathing room and to really give this tour a fair shake, because I think you all deserve it, we deserve it, and it's going to be a great time. So thank you for listening to this normally sized ad in a YouTube video. Peace.